For the lecture today, we're going to be talking more about CSS. We've already been introduced to CSS and HTML. We'll talk more about CSS, and we're also going to, some more detail about the DOM. So this is the way that the HTML document is represented, and it's the way that JavaScript interacts with it. So we've, seen an example just now, reviewing that number guessing game, but we'll look at some more specifics. We'll also look at using the Chrome dev tools for seeing all the things that are going on. All right, so we'll start with some CSS, and I will say off the bat that I am, a CSS guesser. That's my primary methodology when dealing with CSS. I just make random guesses and hopefully eventually something works. Having said that, yeah, that especially applies to things like layout and alignment and things. There are other things that I think are a little more straightforward. But we'll take a quick look at some basics. So again, I have an HTML document and I have an empty style sheet here. I can also add an empty .js. Okay, so I've got a style sheet. I'm gonna go ahead and run this using LiveServer. You can see what it looks like. Amazing. Just a list 1 through 10. So very boring. Nothing much is happening. I can check out the elements and look at, so there's a body, there's a div called container. There's all these div elements that are boxes. We can also, so there's obviously a whole lot going on here, and I'd say most of the time what you care about is console. So you'll be, console logging stuff to debug, and then the elements, just making sure that what you're seeing here. It's just a way of being more specific. There's also a whole bunch of other things. You can go to sources and actually look at the actual code. There's network, all kinds of requests coming. We don't really have, that's not a concern for us right now, but it certainly will be in the future. So it's nice to be able to take a more detailed look at what's being transmitted and received. Performance, memory. So some of this stuff is more advanced if you're really interested in the nitty-gritty of performance. And application, this is going to include things like storage. So will be one of the challenges for today, involves using local storage, security, and Lighthouse, which is kind of a reporting. So it will tell you about your app's efficiency and accessibility and so on. So that there are other things going on as well, but I think that's a good overview. So I just want to point out also in terms of taking a look around and just exploring things. So when you use LiveServer, you get some extra code in your HTML, and sometimes it's nice to take a look. So this LiveServer, it's an extremely successful plugin. So let me just LiveServer. So 10 million people downloaded it. He's on version 5.6. So this is like regularly developed. So this is a guy who made something, and it's extremely useful to the world, extremely successful. Lots of people have been using it, so probably means it's pretty good. That's not always the case, but so it might be, nice to take a look, even if we don't understand it, just to take a look at professional code, every once in a while. So here he has a script tag, so he's inserting a script tag, which you could do. So just like CSS, script can be, we can have a separate file and we can import the file. We can just have a script tag right in our HTML file and run things out of there. So can anyone tell me? So there's two major things happening. One, there's a huge if statement. And then else. So basically, he's just checking if there's this WebSocket. So can your browser handle WebSockets? And then this inner function here, can anyone tell me anything about this function?
It's a immediately invoked function expression.
Yeah, yeah. So it's an iffy. So we haven't really talked about these, but here's an example of someone using an iffy. This means and as is the case with many iffies, it returns, a function, or at least, there's a function inside of it that can be called. Okay, so we have this outer function, which is an iffy, and we have this one inner function and refresh CSS. So what this is doing is enabling the live reload. So every time you save it, it will be reflected in the. So there's all kinds of things going on. You can kind of look through. Some of this stuff should make sense, and some of it probably won't, and that's fine. But I just want to point out at the end, he is using session storage. So he's checking if session storage exists, and then he's also checking this session storage that get item. So there's this thing in here. So apparently, this program is saving something in our browser. So you can actually take a look at that. So session storage is setting an item. This is a nice long name. So let's take a look and see if we can find this thing that apparently has been saved on our browser. So we can go to application, and then you can go to local storage, and this is just something that I put in there. So it's in session storage. And we can see that it's actually here. So that's not like hugely important necessarily right now, but we, there's some code that's hugely successful, and we can actually take a look at it, and it's not too long if we don't understand it, but you can peruse it, and then we can see that it's actually, maybe demystifying some of these things a little bit. All right, so it was kind of a tangent, but let's get back to this. So CSS, right? So we have our HTML document, and we can inspect it in our dev tools. So now what we want to do is, instead of just having this list of numbers, we want to make some nice evenly spaced colored squares. So doing that with HTML would probably be basically impossible. I mean, maybe there's a way, but we're going to have to use CSS here. Where did I put that? Okay, so we can use, there's lots of different ways to do this, but we're going to just show how CSS Grid works. I'm just going to give a very, very basic overview. There's all kinds of things that can be done. So we have a class, and this class has a container. So this is a common pattern. You'll have like a container, often a div, just like a generic thing, and then you have a bunch of elements inside. So we'll have to do something with the container, and then we'll do something with the elements. So if we want to reference that container, it's a class, so dot container. So we have a container, and we can start doing stuff with it. So I often find it's useful to start just by making borders around things when you're developing. So, and we'll make it very noticeable. So it'll be 3 pixels thick, it'll be solid, and it will be black. Okay, we can refresh this, and now we can see that our div, our container class, this outer class, has a border around it. Okay, we can also do things with our boxes. So these are the individual elements right here. We have 10 of them. So if you want to make these colored boxes, first off, we can make them, we can, determine their size. So we can use height. We'll just make them 120 pixels and we'll make them squares. So width will be the same. And we'll add a border here just because, again, it's easy to see. So make it not so noticeable. We'll make it, was it dashed? Okay, so now we have these boxes. They have, some size. Again, we still have this huge div element, but now we're starting to see things take shape a little bit. So we want them to be colored as well. So let's make background color. And then we can, be kind of lazy and choose from these preset colors, which is what I'm going to do. Or we can give specific values, and there's a few different ways that we can do that. Okay, so now we have all these squares, and they're, they have some color, so that's nice. But I don't want them to just be, they're just stacked on top of each other, just normal HTML. So we have this thing, and so we want to be able to control the layout a little bit. So let's say we want to lay these things out in a column. So if you looked at the Hacker News website, they used tables. This is kind of the older way of controlling layout. You just use tables, but that's not really how it works right now. So we can use CSS, especially things like grid and flexbox and all these other things. So on the container class, what we're going to do is use grid. We're going to tell it that we want display grid. And there's a lot of different options for display, but we'll use grid. And we want them to be rows, or columns, sorry. So grid, template, column. And again, this is all like, you can look up all of this stuff. So, and there's a lot of different ways to do this. So I wouldn't worry about memorizing the syntax for any particular thing that I'm doing. So the way this works is you can pass it different kinds of measurements. So one of them is basically like a proportional thing. So we can do 1 FR. So we can decide how many columns we want. So let's say we want 5. And we want them to be all the same. So that's 5, I think. So if we save this now, you can see that now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we turn this just kind of styleless list into some columns. All right, and we can also change the way that things are organized. Let me close this. So we can justify items, center. So again, so if we took this off, everything was kind of lined up to the left by default. If we go center, now everything is centered, so there's margins on the left and right. There are other things you can do. We can also, add margins around everything. So with grid, there's something called grid gap, which should exist. Okay, so now we have some space in between these. You can also, we're using pixels here. So we have FR, this is a proportional measurement. There's pixels, which is absolute. There's also another common So EM is another relative measurement. It's based on font size. I forget exactly what it is, if it's a fixed font size or just like a font size. It's like local to whatever it is. But anyway, so we'll do one EM. It's a very, jumps up quickly. So that's 3 EMs. So if you want to, base things on font size proportionally, you can use EM. That's another common measurement. So, CSS, you can think of, 2 basic classes of measurements. So it's absolute and relative. Okay, so we've got our container. And so what happens if we want to do something like, let's say, these are all blue and, this is a nice color and everything, but we'd like a little bit of variety. So we want every other one to be some other color. How could we? So there's a number of ways we could do that, but what's one way we could do it?
One way you could do it is by giving them an index and setting the, using a modulus operator to determine whether it's even or odd and specify all the even ones one color and all the odd ones another color.
Yeah, so we could go into our JavaScript file and we could get all of the children. We could do maybe like query selector all and get all of the divs or all the divs of this particular class, and then get their indexes, and then maybe directly change the class in the JavaScript. So that's definitely one way you could do it. We could also maybe just add another class here. So we have like box. Let me see. So we have box. Maybe we could have box and then box even. We could have box even and box odd classes, and then create another class here for box even or box odd, and then change the color there. We could also, so CSS, although, computer scientists, feel free to chime in, but I guess it's maybe a complete programming language. I'm not quite sure, but you can do some things with it for sure. And so there are things called pseudo classes in CSS. So we can, instead of creating a new class specifically, we can kind of dynamically change things. So we can, the syntax for that is, so let's say we want to change our box, right? So we want every other thing to be a different color. So we'll say, hey, all of the boxes, I think we have to use a dot, to all of the box class things. We're going to do nth child, something like that. And we can say odd. So the syntax for these is whatever element or class or ID or whatever you're trying to grab, and then colon. And then there's a handful of these pseudo classes, and nth child is just one of them. And you can pass it odd or even or a specific number. And it will basically change the styles here. So we can add a different background color. We'll do coral. And now every other one is, so we didn't have to do anything with JavaScript. We didn't have to create a whole nother class and then label all of everything. So it's probably the cleanest way to do this particular thing. So pseudo classes can be useful. So there's also other pseudo classes. So we'll add another one. There's one called hover. This is a commonly seen one. So you hover, and then we'll just change again. We'll do background color, dark green. And now so nothing happens, but once I hover over something, it changes. So this is all just, again, we could do this with JavaScript or something. You could use a mouse a mouse over event or a mouse enter, a mouse leave event, and then dynamically change things. But this is, again, I think probably the simplest way to do that. All right, and then so you can grab, we can do like odd or even every other thing. We can hover. We'll just look at a couple more examples. So box, and we'll do and last child. So some of these are, might not be quite so useful depending on what you're doing, but so we can specifically say we want the third to last child. So the third to last div, and we'll change the background color yet again. So now the third to last, the eighth one. So 3, 2, 1. The third to last one is a different color. And notice that this is overriding. So CSS is, kind of, you'll encounter this issue a lot. So there are complex rules for, what takes priority. But in this case, this select there comes lower than this one, and so it's overriding it. So just something to watch out for as you're developing. Okay, there's also, so in addition to the pseudo classes, there's something called media queries. So media query, if you go back to our dev tools here, we can look at this device bar. So it might be hard to see, but it's in the upper left corner of the dev tools. You can click on that, and basically allows us to see what we're doing on different devices. So like, especially phones, right? So, in terms of how people consume websites, I don't know what the numbers are, but, if your site doesn't work on a phone, then you're in trouble. So you can see that we've got some issues with display here. So it looks like we might have to make some adjustments. Once the screen gets too small, our display gets messed up. So we can also test that here, just kind of going, so it's okay. And then all of a sudden stuff starts like shifting off the screen, even if so we're losing elements. So we don't want that to happen. So there's a few different things we could do, but one of them, like the standard thing, is to use keyframes. Or I'm sorry, not keyframes. That's for animations, which we'll cover in a sec. We'll do media. And there's all kinds of different media queries you can do. And again, you don't need to memorize the syntax for this. You can always just look it up. But max width. And we can set a number of, whatever unit we want to use. So let's do 650 pixels. And just like these pseudo classes, we're just saying, basically what we're saying is, when the screen is less than 650 pixels long, and then we're going to change some stuff. So we can change whatever we like, but we'll change box. So yellow, green. And then we can do so we use a %. So there's different kinds. So you can use %, you can use absolute measures, you can use relative measures. So you can try doing that. And then what happens when we hit this point, you can see that. So there's a transition that's happening, and now this is squishing up. So this is not, there are lots of other ways to handle it. This is just one example, but this type of thing, media queries, you want to check the the window of the device you're using. So you open the dev tools, you can check it out on a phone. So it looks like you can see everything on the phone as well. Okay, so I think that's it for see. Oh, there's also animations. Animations are kind of cool. So the animations is called keyframes, and you can give it a name for your animation. So we'll do we'll just call it grow. And again, you don't need to memorize the syntax, but what we're doing is you can choose a number of different states. You can mark them by %, and then it will change. So it'll execute like a smooth transitioning animation. So we'll do width. Something like that. Yeah. Okay. So so one thing. So we kind of write the animation function. So we're just going to increase the height of something to 200 pixels, and then in the element that we want to use. So let's say in our box element, we'll have to tell it about the animation. So animation name. And that will be grow. And the duration. Let's see, make it 2 seconds. I think that should be good enough. So let's see. So if we refresh this, all the boxes grow and then come back. So there's a lot of other things you can do with that as well. Okay. So I'm gonna